Welcome,
Good morning,
Heather.
Adrian.
This is episode 45, KT Confidential. And today we've got Heather Karloff, salesperson extraordinaire of the KT team. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me today.
So you're here because coincidentally you missed an appointment.
I did miss an appointment this morning. Yeah.
And originally it was because you thought your phone forgot to remind you.
I switched from Android to iPhone, and I completely blamed the iPhone for not reminding me.
Apple was getting flack this morning.
It was,
And
absolutely.
then what did you realize?
I realized upon further investigation that it was set for 9:30 p.m. tonight.
Right.
When in fact, that shouldn't be the case.
Well, it's unfortunate you missed your appointment, but I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be as much fun recording by myself.
Yeah.
So today, what I wanted to talk about, and you brought something up that kind of coincides with it, is so actually today we have a mutual release being signed for a property that we have for sale. Mm-hmm. It was sold conditionally, and the buyer is unable to fulfill their financing needs to purchase it, and there was a finance condition, so the house is going back on the market. And before we signed this offer, I told the owners that I didn't have a lot of confidence in the buyers. And I just wanted to talk about this because I think people, when you're accepting an offer, especially if there's multiple offers, there's so much more to it than just looking at the numbers
Just the number, yeah.
and the conditions. Mm-hmm. Have you had that experience?
Absolutely. If the deposit's low, could be a bit of a red flag there.
Yeah.
One thing I've done in the past, I like to go into the system, into Geo Warehouse, and find what they currently own. See what they own, seeing how long they've owned it, and I can kind of gauge from there what kind of down payment they're going to have, what kind of equity they have in it, to kind of give me an idea of whether or not they can afford it.
Yeah.
You know, often, I mean, you don't know what, they might have the money dog-eared for, but it'll give you a good indication of what they're capable of floating. Going from, say, a condo to a large detached two-car garage home, you might be a little worried about something like that in the market today. But it depends how long they've owned something and what location it's in.
And so another thing with that is if they have a house to sell, it's especially if there's, well, I guess not necessarily especially if there is one, but if there is a condition upon the sale of the buyer's property, it becomes important then also. Absolutely. But knowing what they have to sell, where it is, what type of home it is, and then even as a realtor representing the seller in this case, trying to dig a little bit and understand if the buyer has reasonable expectations for the sale of their home.
Yes. Yeah. Always a concern for sure.
Yeah. And are they ready to list it now, or do they have, how much work do they have before it goes on the market? Mm-hmm. Because if they can't close, if they don't sell, they can't close.
Absolutely.
So that's a big thing for sure.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm big on is kind of gauging the level of competency of the realtor you're dealing with.
In terms of their paperwork?
Paperwork is the first sign.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the first things I said to our clients on this particular house was there were a few errors. Now, there was none of the errors on their own were a concern, but when you put everything together, it raises some flags. So like little things like there's an area on the purchase agreement for people that don't know where you have to put the measurement of the lot.
Yes.
And part of that, you have to include the units of measurement. So if it's 115 feet, you have to put feet.
Yeah.
You can't just put 115.
Yeah.
Because that's left
Could be
for
meters,
interpretation.
which would be
right.
Huge.
Also, there's a spot where it says city of or municipality of, and then the name of the place. They put city of and then blank. So they forgot, in this case, the city name.
Yeah.
What else was there? They spelled in, there was a postal code that was incorrect, and little things like that throughout the offer. So
that's a lot to have on one too.
Yes.
Like one, you're like, okay, that happened. Someone's rushing to get the offer in. That property was new to the market.
Yeah.
But that many is a bit of a...
For sure. And so if you're a buyer and you're hiring someone to represent you, you need to make sure that when they're preparing things that it's also correct, because this is the first impression that the sellers of the house you want to buy have of you, right? And they're judging your ability to buy the house based upon these things.
Yeah, and it's not just the realtor filling it out and making a mistake, which absolutely happens from time to time. But then part of that falls back onto the buyer because they're supposed to read everything over.
Yes.
And a lot of times people are like, yep, and not looking and checking the spelling of their names or that the postal code is correct and all that. So it's not.
Or that the ad, they're buying the right house.
Yeah.
Like,
God,
like if they've put 5 offers in and they missed out on 5 and now they're on number 6, the agent may be using paperwork that had the previous address pre-populated.
Absolutely, that could be a problem.
And that looks silly from the seller's perspective if they get that. Also, little things I look for. So I because I didn't have a whole lot of faith, I was digging and asking the realtor questions about his clients.
Yeah.
He didn't know much.
Oh, so they haven't worked together. Okay.
Yeah. So that's always something I look for. Like, is this a realtor that's taken the time to qualify their client and knows that they are approved and knows that they are going to have, high odds of getting their financial obligations in line? Yeah. Or is this somebody that's desperate to make a deal, took a random person off the streets and is trying to help them buy a house?
Yeah.
And in this case, it was kind of in between. He was apparently helping out a colleague who was on vacation and he didn't know them personally.
All right.
He was well-spoken though and he was good to deal with, but there's a lot of little things that bothered me. Do you ever look up buyers online, like LinkedIn, Facebook, stuff like that?
I've only gone in a few times to look at that, but my main one I go to right away is always straight to what do they currently own. Yeah. That's the first thing I try to find out. For renters, of course, right into Facebook and LinkedIn and their jobs. Like I've had some funny things pop up with that where, you just get that feeling like this isn't going to come together. Or when an offer is too good to be true, or, I got something out of the blue, the agent never called to say, hey, I got this offer coming, which everybody typically does, coming your way. And it was way over what we were asking, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. And then the more I looked into this person through LinkedIn and Facebook, nothing added up. And in the end, we didn't go with that high offer because nothing felt good about it.
Well, that was the same sort of concern I had with this one because I couldn't find these buyers anywhere. No LinkedIn, no Facebook, no Instagram.
I find that strange, especially with people of a certain age. This particular applicant was under the age of 30, a woman, and I found it strange that she was nowhere to be found on social media. And there was no credit history prior to 2018. And I was like, who doesn't have a credit card? Or something. I seemed like maybe bankruptcy was in there. But it's weird not to have, when someone doesn't have anything online, I find that strange, people of a certain age to not have anything. Yeah.
Well, and something you said too is when something feels too good to be true. Sometimes that, as tempting as it may be, is something that should be just enough of an indication that you need to dig into it a little bit more. Yeah,
and it's funny, like you said, with that offer you got, you felt right away it wasn't right. It's that gut feeling, and often you're right. Your instincts are correct. You feel like something's not quite adding up, and you usually are right.
Well, and I'm a huge advocate of making sure you set reasonable expectations with everybody involved in the transaction, specifically people you're representing. So in this case, there were 3 people involved in the sale. So I informed each of them that I didn't have much faith in the deal coming together. So, come the end of the conditional period where we're signing off on a mutual release, it doesn't come as a surprise. And we're able to diligently get the house back on the market and start marketing it again, and hopefully
that is really great, getting them prepared, because all of a sudden you're like, oh, it didn't come together, and they're surprised and possibly upset because it's an emotional experience for them, and well, what happened, or why is this happening? And that you prepared them beforehand is really kind of take a load off of them and kind of calm everybody down.
Yes. So I mean, these are just kind of as an aside, these are great tips for any real estate agents listening. These are things they need to be making notes on, especially new people. But so back to that, setting right expectations. Ariel and I were chatting in the last podcast about how he hates when people try to hide things in listings. Like he was using an example of a house that may have a building just behind the backyard, and all the photos were facing inward, so you can't see the building. And then you show up and there's this big building in the backyard. You're giving people high expectations. They come into the house and then they're completely let down because they didn't know what sort of reasonable expectations to have. Same thing goes with that situation. I told them it's not likely to come together. So it doesn't come as a surprise when it doesn't. But if it does, then all of a sudden their experience is 10 times better. So it goes a long way.
The setting of expectations even goes for when you're taking them out to view properties.
Yeah.
I've been looking at quite a few out in Ancaster recently, and there was this one that it looked great from the outside, same type of thing. All the photos were just at the front. You couldn't really see anything else going on around the house. But as soon as you hop onto Google Street View it, and it looks like construction all around it. And I was like, that's not something I knew my clients would be interested in.
Yeah.
And so that's something to prepare them. You'd hate to show up to something and be like, oh, I didn't investigate this before I took you to see a house too.
Yeah. Well, I remember one time I was showing a house, and I don't know if it was vacant or tenant, whatever it was. It's relevant, I guess. But the listing agent called me after I scheduled the appointment before we got there. And he told me, just so you know, the place is a mess. And he made it sound really bad.
Yeah.
So I relayed that to my clients. Just so you know, before we go in, apparently it's a big mess.
I like the term full. I've had agents tell me the place is very full.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, hoarder. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always scary.
Yeah.
But so we go in, and it's not that bad.
Oh,
right?
Well, good.
Yeah. And my clients even said that. They're like, oh, this isn't that bad. But
Okay.
all of a sudden, it's like they come in with these lower expectations, and it's not as bad as what they expected. All of a sudden, they have a more positive outlook on the situation.
Absolutely, they would. Yeah.
So that's good. So what else can people look for? So far, we've got paperwork. Make sure the paperwork is done properly.
Yep.
The realtor, how competent they are.
Yep.
That's a big one, I find.
Yes.
Because like leases are a big thing.
Yeah.
When you're getting a lease, when we're representing a landlord, it's not so much about the price. Obviously the price is important, but more so who's coming in.
I think that trumps the price. I think people would be willing to go $20, $25 a month less to have the right tenant in there that they're comfortable with.
$100 less, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. To get that right tenant in there for sure. That's their asset, and they want to make sure someone's going to take care of it. So price, yeah.
So what would you look for? What would raise a red flag for you?
For a tenant?
Yes.
Coming in, the jobs have been funny. People coming in with, there's a lot of new people to the country. The no credit thing wasn't huge for me. Job status would be like, where is this money coming from? Would be my most. I've had some people with situations. Everyone seems to have a story, and they call you beforehand with their story. And I'm like, just send it, put it down on a piece of paper, and send it on, because I'm not the one making the decision. The landlord is. But when people come in and be like, well, I don't currently have a job right now, and my wife's not living with me, but she's going to be paying for it, and just like the job thing, I think would be the stickler for me. Like, I want to make sure they're going to be able to pay that for my client. And the whole no credit thing, I think we could work with a bit more. I'd be more flexible with, but the no job is a little bit scary.
What about from the perspective of paperwork?
How the paperwork's done?
Yes.
Like I said, I'm really...
Because with a lease, just to kind of make sense of it for people, there's a lot of documents we request.
Yes.
Right? In order for a landlord to make an informed decision, they want to learn about as much as they can about the tenant. So what can you think of that might be of concern? Or what do you like to see?
What do I like to see in the paperwork? Well, a good credit score, a good letter of employment. References I take with a grain of salt. It's always nice to have them. Me calling up and talking to the references, I prefer over a letter for sure. Anyone who sent a letter, I've called the references directly, and sometimes they're a little tricky to get a hold of. But yeah, I want to see a good credit score, letter of employment, a reference that I'm able to telephone, and that the paperwork is filled out correctly. I feel maybe a bit lenient with that, where one or two mistakes, where I wouldn't judge it too quickly. But yeah, it comes down to employment, really. Yeah.
And one thing that I can't stand is I got one recently where the paper's just not even legible.
Oh. Like the rental application?
The rent, like you get realtors that will take pictures of things instead of scanning it, or even scanning it with your phone.
Yeah.
So it's legible and looks clean and professional.
Yep.
So we turn it away. We say, you need to send us a clear copy that we can read, or somebody will send you like 3 of 5 pages of the Equifax report.
That happens a lot where they don't have the full report. One person said to me, well, my report's 50 pages long. And I was like, well, that's a little bit concerning. A little bit strange. But I'll just send you the score part and be like, no, I need to see all of that.
Yeah. And actually, it's funny because one of our agents had an application come in for one of his rentals recently, and it was a husband and wife. And I don't know their cultural background, but they said that, so they applied for the lease under the husband's name.
Okay.
And his income wasn't really consistent. It was like some Uber driving sort of income and then some self-employed sort of income. Mm-hmm. So we weren't 100% comfortable with it. So we said, well, why is the wife working? Yes, she's working. Okay, well, let's add the wife. And they said, no, for cultural reasons, they don't like to have the wife on.
Interesting.
Yeah. I call bullshit.
Yeah, I probably.
And so did Chris.
Yeah.
And whenever you get a gut feeling about something, always follow it. So we did, and we pushed, and they sent in her credit information. Oh. Terrible.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely terrible.
There you go.
So, we knew immediately that it wasn't, and maybe it is a cultural thing, I don't know, but we knew that it needed to be looked into further.
Yeah.
Because based on the original application, it wasn't going to work. So if they wanted to have the opportunity to make it work, we needed something more substantial.
Absolutely. And especially if she's going to be living there, right?
Yeah. Like if she's contributing, like when I was working in the auto industry and you're applying for car loans, like if there's two people on the ownership, they want both people on the finance. Because if both people are contributing towards the payments, then both people need to take responsibility for it.
Absolutely.
So even if one applicant was terrible and the other was bankrupt, the bank wouldn't touch it because I guess statistics would show that it's likely there's going to be problems.
Yeah. So one didn't outweigh the other.
Right.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. And it's not like you can use the good person to give you better credit.
Yeah. That's going to up it a bit.
You need to work on your credit a little bit and then come back to us. So that's always a big red flag. But I don't understand why people don't just send in the proper documents. And some tenants don't like to provide all that info.
No. So I had an experience recently where a young couple were looking to rent a place, and it was a basement apartment, and I found one for them. We met up at it. It was great. Just one of the couple, the gentleman was able to meet me there, and everything seemed fine. And I had previously, about a week before, sent them the list of documents, and these aren't things to hand over to me immediately. It's to start preparing. So when you find a place, let's get the offer in and stuff to have ready to go. And then it took a couple of days went by, and they still weren't sending it over to me. And then I got a message from the gentleman very angry about what I was asking for and like, why are you asking me for this? It's just a basement apartment. And I said, well, just to clarify, I'm not asking for it. The landlord's asking for it. He was upset about it and said, well, this is the requirements to work with you. I don't want to work with you. And I was quite taken aback by it. And I'm like, these are the steps to follow so the landlord's comfortable with who he's renting to. And if you're not comfortable with doing that, then you won't be able to rent that particular unit. And I was very taken aback by how upset he got about it. And we're discussing maybe there is a problem with employment or credit that they didn't want to share. And it's
quite possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also the other group of people that are just very private and they don't like to provide that information, which is understandable. But if, then go buy a house.
Yeah.
Right. But if you want to rent somebody's house, and in most cases, these are privately owned properties, and these properties are probably this person's biggest asset and their retirement fund.
Yep.
And they rely on the rental income to cover the bills.
Yep.
And if they don't have that rental income, they're using a line of credit to pay for it. Right. So, of course, it matters who's coming in.
Yep, and I believe the owners lived upstairs and had a child. So you're going to be a little extra cautious about 100%. Who you get in there when your family is in that house and your children in the house. You want to be 100% comfortable with who you're renting out to. And these are the things that are necessary to get a place rented, especially in a competitive market. And people just want to do their due diligence and feel safe about their decision to rent because there's so many bad stories out there. So it's what's required. The other problem was insurance. Didn't understand why he needed insurance on it, and everyone needs tenant insurance to protect themselves. And even in condos,
you should send them podcast number 43. 43?
I should. That's a good idea.
With Zach? Yeah. Yeah. So just so everyone knows, if you didn't watch 43, if the landlord deems it necessary, it's necessary.
Yep.
And you should want it anyways.
Absolutely.
Liability, especially. I mean, personal contents, that's your decision. If there's a fire or something happens and your personal stuff gets ruined, if you don't care, then don't get personal content insurance. But liability is huge.
Yeah.
Because especially in a basement.
Yeah.
What if, you've got somebody upstairs that you don't know, who knows what maybe they sue you for something.
Yeah, someone once positioned it to me as, say you live in an apartment building and you leave a tap on or whatever, and it doesn't just damage your unit. What about the people below? And then the people below that, and you have to just think about all scenarios and all the people that could be affected if something goes wrong with it. So it's just, I'd rather have peace of mind, and no one wants to pay extra money a month, but for peace of mind, it's definitely necessary, and I would always take it out.
Yeah, or like in that case, if it's a basement and upper unit and there are two different rentals and you both share a double driveway and you're responsible for shoveling one side and they're responsible for the other, and they trip on your side because you didn't shovel it, and they sue you. Who knows?
Yep.
People sue people. People sue for everything nowadays. And a lot of times they win. And tenant insurance is, I think, pretty reasonable.
I think so too.
So it's probably worth getting.
Yeah.
But in that person's case, if they don't want to provide that information, they're going to severely limit their options.
Yes.
But I also think that if somebody's willing to take on a tenant without knowing anything, they're going to be a shitty landlord because they obviously don't care.
Yep. Yeah,
right?
That's true.
So if they don't care who's coming in, they're not going to care about you when you have a problem.
Yep, you're right. You're absolutely right. I didn't think about it that way, but you're right.
Yeah. I mean, there's stories like that all the time. My brother, when he first moved out, he was renting some basement apartment and there was mold that he found like under his bed and stuff.
Oh.
Landlord didn't care.
Really?
And I'm sure he probably didn't ask my brother for his credit information.
Yeah. Oh, and then when he moved out, the next person wouldn't tell them either?
Of course
wouldn't
not.
Fix it?
No, he just wants to get paid. Doesn't care about anything
just wants
else.
to get paid. Yeah.
So I think they're reasonable requests. Proof of income, job letter, a combination of the two perhaps, or just one of the two at a minimum, and
credit report
and score. The score is, if you can read a credit report, you can usually get a pretty good general understanding. The score's helpful at a glance, but if you get a detailed report, you can usually read through it and get a pretty good understanding for somebody's ability to pay.
To make payments, make them on time. Yeah.
So that's my big thing this week. I just want to make sure people are doing their due diligence in not only looking at the numbers, but analyzing the buyer and their realtor to figure out, who am I working with? Yep.
And make sure that a deal that's coming through is going to go through. And if you don't feel that it is, managing your client's expectations.
Right. And in this case, there was just one offer and I had reached out to everybody else and nobody was immediately interested. So we were prepared to work with it. If there are multiple offers, it's even more important.
Yes.
Because the person with the higher amount may not be the one you want to go with.
Yep. Those conditions, like you had mentioned, the one about selling your home first, a buyer wants to sell their home first, that would definitely, even if they had the highest offer, I would be quite wary of that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, depending on which market. Yeah.
Well, and maybe even looking at the realtor that's representing them, looking at their listings to see how they sell their homes. Because there's some people that I just wouldn't trust to get it done in time.
Yep, absolutely.
So that's it. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think that's it today.
All right. Thanks for listening. Episode 45.
All right. Thanks for having me.